And I guess we'll just get into it. Before I start that, I guess I'll just give you a bit of my background. I am a physiotherapist. I graduated from UBC many, many moons ago. We won't talk about how many. However, my silly RA has progressed to a point now where in June, my rheumatologist and my GP said, you're done. So I ended up retiring in June 25th was my last day. I've got a few things in the pipeline, but my medical team has said, we don't even want you thinking about anything for at least 6 months. So I feel really privileged to be here to do this. Makes me kind of feel like I'm useful still. And I am very excited because I've never presented from combining two things, combining my professional aspects with my living aspect and being a patient with it. And I think that does give us, each of us, when we've done anything, a unique perspective. And I think as cheesy as it sounds, I'm very excited to have been connected to Christina through Eileen, because I think that this is super important for those of us that live with it. There's a connection there. I feel that there is an increased credibility to the things that she is telling, hopefully that I am telling you, that you're like, okay, they understand me. And I think there's a huge disconnect of that. Okay. There's a huge disconnect between medical professionals and patients often. And we need to, well, that's what advocacy is about, right, Eileen? So
you should get on the Arthritis Research Canada Patient Advisory Board. I'm just saying that again.
I mentioned that to my rheumatologist and he just gave me this look. I told you 6 months. I was like, okay. He wanted me to wait 6 months to get better, to feel better. So, but
we'll discuss that.
Okay, so I'm just going to start with my screen sharing here. And can everybody see that if you give me a thumbs up? Okay, good. So again, like I said, I'm a physiotherapist and I like to use the term motion is lotion. It's cheesy, but it's true. Movement and motion, your joints, every joint has a joint capsule. And that capsule is what has the majority of the blood supply to a joint. So to get the nutrition out of the blood supply circulating in the joint, it is the fluid on the inside of the joint, the synovial fluid, as it moves, coming in contact with the joint capsule, that it gets the exchange of the nutrients to the joint. So that is why fundamentally, there's lots of other reasons, but one of the main reasons why movement is so important, because that nutrition, that fluid, there's something called thixotropy, which is it's likened to engine oil. When it's warmer, that engine oil is smoother. It gets things going, it lubricates things better, and you've got more movement. And so warming up our joints, moving, that is also, you have that property, thixotropy, in your muscles as well. So I'm going to do some do's and don'ts, tips and tricks. Some of this you might not know. Some of this you probably know. Some of it you might not. At any point in time, if you have any questions, just shoot it in on chat or wave your hand and we'll answer that. So just wanted to start with that professional disclaimer. The following, it's generalized guidelines that have been looked at through research and things like that, but they're not necessarily suitable for everyone. Christina and I, we were just talking about how the disease, it's so different for all of us. Yes, there are commonalities through each of us, but it is so different. So I always say, please consult an exercise professional that will be able to create a plan and a program that meet your specific needs, okay? Again, we all know why we need to exercise, but here's some reasons that as a patient, you might not actually thought about existentially, shall we say. So it's a reminder that medication and inflammation control, it doesn't reverse any of the negative changes that have occurred in our body. Obviously, we know that once we hit those, like the deformities, the skeletal changes, those don't really get reversed. Yeah. But body morphology, strength, support, balance, these types of things that really change as our disease progresses, as we go into remissions, as we, go from flare to not flare, as medications start, those things are modifiable. And a lot of people, one of the barriers that I found, right, is fatigue. But physical activity is one of the best things to actually combat RA fatigue. Okay. And when you can get a plan, such as like walking, stretching, using bands, they're simple, they're cost effective, they're portable, they can go everywhere with you so that you have something that's more doable. Okay. And as well, one of the big things that I think a lot of people forget about is that as we exercise, as we get stronger, that creates joint support. No, but not only does it give joint support, that supporting of the joint actually decreases the stress and the loading that happens through the joint, which can accelerate degeneration if that's not controlled well. Does that make sense? Okay. It also can help to reduce that bone loss that a lot of us get from the devil's tic tacs there with prednisone. One of the big things that we find is that there's a lot of barriers to exercise. And I'm sure you all know this because every single one of those things exists in my life, even though I know these things, right? So how do we overcome those barriers to start with, right? We want to find activities and environments that are accessible to us, but that we enjoy. If we make this a chore and we hate it, we're not going to do it, no matter what, hands down, across the board. So we want to figure out what works for us. Again, that kind of brings us back to that individualized plan. But over and above that, right, we want to encourage breaks during sedentary behaviors. So like what we're doing right now. We want to take breaks. And we need to balance exercise and movement when the disease is active. So for us, our plans aren't always going to be the same. You can't say, I have this plan, I'm going to do it always 3 days a week. Well, if we have a week, like I know Christina had a rough week, I had a rough week. I didn't go to the gym once this week, that's it. But I used some of the other days to just do gentle movement. Okay. And just reminding yourself that exercise is going to help us, right? It's going to help us have less pain, more energy, it improves our sleep, and our function gets improved as well. And one of the other barriers is finding when it is right for you to do your exercise. Okay. So where to start? Generally speaking, you want to think about whether you're doing therapeutic exercise or kind of leisure exercises. Usually, if you're participating in recreational exercise, it does not preclude the need to have some more of the therapeutic. And your therapeutic are those ones that are specific to whichever joint is having a difficulty, or whether it's your balance, that's your difficulty, right? Again, that comes back down to that personalized plan. Often starting with doing a little bit of things with body weight and stretching and range of motion is much more helpful as you lead in to doing the other exercises with resistance, because again, it gets that going. It's that fixotrophy, right? It gets decreases that stiffness, which in turn gets you in a better position to be able to safely perform any exercises. When you get an exercise program, or even when you're thinking about your program, wanting to know what things can be modified for those days that are a bit more difficult than not. So if you are lifting a 10-pound weight for bicep curls, knowing that you have a 5-pound weight, or if that's even too much, just using a band or using or not even doing that and combining it with a different exercise that will bring in your biceps as well, but that will not cause pain. The other thing is using adaptive devices. So I myself, people laugh at me because I have a massive gym bag. I don't put it in the locker. It goes from station to station with me because it has all of my stuff in it. And I've got some of that here to show you guys. So one of the big things for me is my RA has hit my elbows, something fierce, and they are just not in good shape. So just a simple elbow strap is helpful. I have one for both arms. Knowing the difference between like having a weight versus bands versus also there's these, my brain just farted, but these are the bands that you can wrap, there you go, that you wrap around your legs that, you know, so that you don't have to tie knots in your other bands.
Resistance bands.
Well, yeah, they're all resistance bands, but there's a specific name for the ones that are round, and I can't remember it off the top of my head. There's also just wrist wraps. You'll see that a lot of heavier lifters, maybe they have RA, I don't know. I'm pretty sure some of those guys don't, but using this just as a support. You can, depending on where your issues are, but even just having like a gentle sleeve, like that compression sleeve to keep those sore joints warm and that gentle compression to help with any kind of swelling. You see on there, they're called hauling hooks. Now, unfortunately, I have not been in a position to need to use these in the last little while, but when my disease was pretty under control a number of years ago, I got to the point where I needed to lift heavier weights, but my hands actually couldn't handle the heavier weight. So these are called hauling hooks, and they wrap around your wrist, kind of like that wrist support. But then this, it wraps underneath the weight so that you don't have to do a grip. And then you can be here, and the lion's share of the weight is kind of through the wrist. So there's the hook, and then they also have, which you may have seen on some of the other bigger guys, there's also this where you can wrap it around. I don't like this as much as I preferred the hooks. So there's another option. For whatever reason, we don't sell these in Canada. I got mine directly from Hauling Hooks in the States. I'm blessed enough to have an aunt that lives just on the other side of the border, so I can pick up packages from her. But I haven't researched lately, but they may now be in Canada. I can take a look at that if anybody's interested, and I can get that information out to you. So those are some of the different things. You know, there's also padded gloves. I wrote in there like yoga blocks. So here's like a yoga block that you can use. I often use it also with stretching to still get the stretch, but not have to go so deep into that range of motion to the, like, I don't know about you, if you've ever gone to the floor to stretch and then you're stuck on the floor. Can't get back up. So there's kind of the generalized speaking things. You also want to make sure that you're in comfortable clothing. You know, all those straightforward stuff that I'm pretty sure you all know, but it's always, it's usually a good reminder to get to do. So planning and when to work out. So a good thing would be to figure out what works for you. Are you a morning person? Are you the mid-afternoon person? Like, when is your body happiest? That middle paragraph there, right? For those with a lot of morning stiffness, gentle range of motions may be helpful. When getting to a fitness class might be too difficult. You know, fatigue is the problem. Break it up throughout the day into several manageable packets of time. You know, avoid doing aerobic exercise 2 hours before bedtime if you have a hard time sleeping, you know, like these types of things. Again, pretty straightforward, but definitely I don't always remember them when I'm just trying to get back into things when I've been in pain. Okay. So what should a program have that's more specific to us with RA? Flexibility in order to accommodate changes when you're in pain. And again, knowing those options of what, how your exercises can be modified in more than one way. because from my experience, you can be actually super awesome today and really, really bad tomorrow. And so having multiple options is, I feel, the best way to go. Moderate intensity is what's recommended for those of us with RA in the research. I want to apologize. All of the points in here have been researched. I just did not have enough time to properly cite everything. I do have the references at the end. One day, if we keep doing this presentation, I promise I will get that going. But what is moderate intensity? So moderate intensity is 50 to 70% of your maximum heart rate. Maximum heart rate changes with age. So here's a example calculation for myself. It's 220 minus your age, and then times whatever of that percentage you're trying to look at. So as you look through there, for me to work at a 60% of my maximum heart rate, I'm aiming for 106 beats per minute, which is actually pretty good for me because my RA has affected my heart and I'm on beta blockers and I can't get much higher than 106. Another way, rather than being so specific, if you don't have a heart rate monitor, is that moderate intensity, you should be able to pass the talk test. So, sorry, I'm just admitting Nicole here. There we go. Did that work? Oh, good, it worked. Okay, so what it means is that there's the talk test. You want to be able to, did you want to say hi? This is my daughter. Hi, she just woke up. So she's like, what are you doing? Okay. The talk test is that we should be able to maintain a conversation when we're doing our aerobic exercise. If you're like, too much. You don't want to get too short of breath. You don't want to get overheated. And you should be able to carry on that activity for a sustained amount of time. The strength component. So what we know, yeah.
What if you like to be out of breath, sweating, and that works for you? Is that okay if you have RA? Because absolutely. I find like when I feel the best is when I'm on that elliptical and I'm getting every bit of my frustration out and I'm dripping sweat and I'm not talking to anyone because it's just 20-30 minutes.
Yeah, and I talk about that when we get to the cardio section about progression. Okay. That is, and again, like I said, we're looking at general rules and kind of what they have found seems to be the best for not aggravating our symptoms. So if you have the capability of doing that, 100%, it's fine. Right? Like Christina and I, we were.
Yes, I used to pre-pandemic though, about 2 years almost. So I'm starting to get back into exercise. So this is important for me right now, just because like, I don't want to think 2 years ago because I have RA, there's progressive joint damage. What works now?
And not only is there that progressive joint damage, but we tend to, because you had asked the question about muscle soreness and RA, and I've got some slides at the end there. Some of the research that I came across, there was nothing specific for it, but a lot of the research that I was showing is that those of us with RA, our actual metabolism, the use of glucose, these types of things in our muscles is much different than those that don't have RA. So it's also that recognizing that we actually decondition a lot faster, that we don't, not everybody has the same muscle bulk, the muscle thickness that the general population has as well. So it's important to note how we decondition a lot faster because of the chemistry of our bodies as well.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah. So where to start with strength? With everything, begin slowly, especially if you've been sedentary, which I think has been very much a lot of us in the pandemic. In general, you want to have 6 to 8 exercises of major muscle groups and progress gradually with small increases. Okay, so your major muscle groups are chest, back, arms and shoulders, legs and buttocks, and your core and abdominals. Now, the one thing that I will say right now, not only is this my professional opinion, but my personal opinion, no one ever needs to do a sit-up ever again in their entire lives. Just putting that out there. I hate them with a passion, and I'll explain that in a little bit why.
There are so many other exercises that you can do that are so much more comfortable and easier and don't hurt your back.
Yeah, that don't put the compression through your spine, right? So what resistance activity exercises are activities where you move your body a weight or like a band and you're working against gravity. You're resisting that gravity. And so often for us, body weight exercises are fantastic because they also translate really nicely into functional movements. Sit to stand, getting out of your car, going up and down the stairs, reaching, you know, for something in the fridge or on a cupboard, right? They become more of that functional movement as well. Now, yes, Christina.
So what do you think of Pilates? The Pilates? Yeah.
Yeah.
Right?
Awesome. I'm a fan of Pilates. However, I think this all feeds into my next point. Correct form. You need to make sure you've got a good instructor and you're using good form. I personally really like Pilates. My massage therapist is actually a clinical rehabilitation Pilates specialist. And so we'll do about 20 minutes of Pilates and then go into massage as I need it. And everything, and she goes through it with me. So everything that we do is, again, it's that specific. She will go step by step with my form and things like that. I would love to be in a position where I could go to a Pilates studio and do a class. They're ridiculously expensive. So if you have some benefits, or even not just benefits, but if you can find like an RMT that does the Pilates, I can claim that under RMT. And then if once my extended health, I've used up that, because she's a registered massage therapist, you can then claim that under medical expenses on your taxes, but you no longer can claim exercise on your taxes. When you are starting in terms of reps and sets, you want to start with 2 sets of 12. It's very interesting about how many different numbers are actually out there in the literature. You know, I'll read one that says 2 days a week, one that says 4 days a week, whatnot. So I've given you a range of things. The lowest number in any of the things that I've given you has been the lowest reference from the studies that I looked at. So you want to begin at 2 sets of 12, and you want to progress intensity by a number of different ways. You can either increase the number of sets, you can increase the number of repetitions. Most people don't. Usually when you're getting up to reps of 15, that's where you're getting into like the body sculpting, bodybuilding world. So I wouldn't get up to 15 reps unless you are in a position where you're physically healthy enough and that is something that you want to do. So you can go 3 sets of 12, or you can actually drop down the number of repetitions that you have, but increase resistance. So say you're doing 2 sets of 12 of 5 pound, again, we'll go back to just bicep curls. When you progress that, I would recommend going down to 2 sets of 8 and try 8 pounds. Then as that becomes easier, you then go up to 10 reps, up to 12 reps. Then when you're comfortably doing 2 sets of 12, you can then try 3 sets of 12. And then when you're like, whew, this is easy, you go back again. 2 sets of 8 and bump up to 10 pounds. Does that make sense? Awesome. Okay. And in general, depending on your joints, you may even just find that you prefer more repetitions with less resistance. As a general rule of thumb, if you're building strength, it's heavier weight, heavier resistance, lower repetitions. If you are building endurance, it's lower resistance, higher repetitions. Right. So the difference between a sprinter and a cross-country runner, right? or the difference between like a power lifter is probably not going to be doing, 30 repetitions of something, because it's just not what they need, right? They need that instant power. So varying forms of resistance, like we talked about, body weight. So that's just using your own body weight. So that's like standing and just doing a squat, or stepping up onto a single stair, split kind of squat work, even just arms up, arms out, rotation, different things like that, using your weight, nothing extra, to help build that strength. Then you can go to the bands, like we talked about. I love bands. Why I love bands is because they provide resistance going out and coming in. So there's two types of contractions in our muscles. We've got eccentric and concentric contractions, and you need both. So an example of what I mean by that: concentric contractions are your quads going up the stairs. Eccentric contractions are your quads going down the stairs. Those are two different movements. When you're in pain, you know what I'm talking about. How sometimes I can go up, but I can't come down, and vice versa. And then there's those days where you can't do both either, but you know what I'm getting at, right? So you need to train your muscles in both, okay? When it comes to things like having a tendinitis or disease of the tendons, it's that eccentric movement that has been shown to actually be the most important in rehabbing that tendon. And that's why bands are great. Furthermore, it's important to recognize that the use of free weights, it can increase the potential risk of injury if you're progressing too quickly, because you don't have that control like what you have with a band, okay? And you want to make sure that you are comfortable doing the exercise that you're doing. Going slow and controlled gives you that time to make sure that your form is excellent. Cardio, this is where we were getting to that, right, Eileen? So cardio essentially are just exercises that are using your large muscle groups in a repetitive, rhythmic manner that are consistent, brings your heart rate up, and it challenges your heart and your cardiovascular system. So you want to start with low impact. There are a number of us that can get to high impact, but I'd say the lion's share of us should be at low to moderate impact, with minimizing that high impact. Again, it really depends on your disease activity and who you are in general. So your low impact: walking, cycling, swimming, aquatic exercises, and the elliptical. Now, there are some challenges to using low impact exercises, which I will address in a little bit. One of the things that I love about pool-based exercises is that the buoyancy of the water actually can unload your joint. It can provide support, and the deeper you go, there's actually more hydrostatic pressure. So if you're at your neck, the amount of pressure that is down at your feet is actually helping venous return. So if you're swelling, or if you're swelling, or you don't have good circulation, that water pressure, that hydrostatic pressure, can help bring fluids back up to the heart to have good distribution throughout it. I remember in school learning that with individuals that have been on complete bed rest for extended periods of time, often just submerging them to the chest level was enough of a cardiovascular exercise to challenge their system, because it's increasing that return and increasing the heart's ability to pump. So the goal of exercise is 150 minutes per week, okay? We want to start, we can't all jump in to doing that right away. So you can start with 5 to 10 minute bouts, accumulating up to 20 to 30 minutes. Sometimes I find I actually can't go longer than 30 minutes. My feet just start screaming at me and I'm done. So I try to do that 20 to 30 minutes every day. Let's be honest, I don't, but I try. I try. Okay. But that 150 minutes of that moderate intensity that we talked about is the recommendation. Now, if you can, 100% keep going. Go forward, chronic Eileen. I know you're Eileen. You can push that. It's just that you have to be able to do it. I will talk in a minute about the 2-hour rule. That's where you know if you've pushed yourself too much, that 2 hours after you've done an activity and you are in a lot of pain, or you're so fatigued that you can't even get up to cook dinner for your family or yourself, that's too much. You need to back off on that intensity. I'm not saying don't do the activity. I'm just saying modify your intensity, because that is too much. Does that make sense?
Yes, I have those sometimes, but sometimes I like to push myself too much because, for example, like when I got in super shape, I thought I would never be able to walk the Vancouver seawall. So when I got in super shape, one day I was like, you know what? Screw you, RA. I'm going to walk the seawall.
Yeah.
And I walked the almost 30,000 steps. But when I do that, I also have to be smart and know that, okay, the next day or two after, I have to have nothing going on. I have to rest. Yeah. And when that happens, like I can't get up, like after, like you say, the 2 hours after, I just become like a puddle. But
yeah,
I prepared myself for that.
Yeah.
And sometimes there's the occasional thing that makes it worth extending ourselves too much. But yeah, you have to be very careful and kind of understand where your limits are.
Absolutely, 100%. And this, there is nothing about this in any of the literature at all. But sometimes the psychological benefit of pushing yourself too much is helpful. And again, this is coming from the patient perspective, not the practitioner perspective. Christina and I were talking a little bit. My big thing when I was younger was snowboarding. That's what I did. I did the snow bum thing for years before I went back to university. I lived in Whistler, did the big trips down to the States and crashed on all my friends' couches up and down the West Coast from California to the interior. And I can't do that now, but I will plan. I know that if I'm going to have a day on the hill, I'm going to be useless for 3 days after, but I know that going in. And I think that's the most important thing, is that if you have these things in your life that you love, that you know are going to be hard after, that is a completely different entity than trying something and being like, I can't move now, and not knowing. So again, it's hard, but I think one of the best management principles that we can have as people living with RA is trying to know our bodies and listen and learn these different things. And that's one of the things for me is that my
just one quick thing I want to mention before Christina is just because we're on the topic, but sometimes when I fall off the wagon and start exercising again and I push myself, eventually I get strong enough that pushing myself gets easier too. Like I stop needing so much rest after my exercises, because it can be really hard knowing exactly where your limit is.
Yep.
Because sometimes it doesn't show up till later.
100%. 100%. But it's still the knowledge, knowing though that if you push yourself, you might get there. Right. And if you do have something really important the next day, you're like, you then just know I don't push it all. Right. So it's kind of, I guess also knowing your schedule.
No, I have a question. So since we're into like 30 minutes into the, what will
I'm sorry.
No, about actually, I see what will be like maybe a stretching exercise that maybe we can do while we're sitting down.
Absolutely.
So maybe you can.
Yeah. Can you guys see that? So this is a handout that I will send to Christina that she can email to all of you guys. This is just the getting up to stretch. We've got, can you see me as well, or do you just see my screen?
We can see you. Well, I can see you.
And I can see everybody too. But right, so just your gentle neck. So we go side to side. You can see I have one side of my neck that moves better than the other. And that just gentle shoulder rolling backwards and forwards. Now, again, these are specific to just sitting, so not to us. So this whole upper back stretch where you come across like this or like this, that one actually hurts my shoulders. So I'm more like the hug and then drop your chin down. Can you feel that? Yeah. And up. Then the side stretch where they go up and over, this is about all my shoulders can do. So I would even just stay here and just side bend, side to side. If your shoulders will go up, great, go ahead, do it. Mine won't. So I'll just keep them here. Your pec stretch, again, coming up. Actually, I can do this one, even though my shoulders, but know that if the pec type of stretches hurt your shoulder, you can actually bring those elbows down a bit lower and still get a good pec stretch than having to have them up here, kind of even here and back. You can get a good pec stretch. Can you feel how it's getting the fibers still, even with your shoulders or your elbows lower down? Just a side tip, when you think about stretching, if you can, which not everybody does because we don't all have anatomy training, but think about like with a pec muscle, it actually fans out like this. So changing where your arm position is going to target different parts of that fiber. Okay. And the same thing for like for your bicep. If you think about, right, it goes up into your shoulder, but starts down here. So thinking about how you can effectively elongate from that point to the other point can also help you modify where to put your body in space to target that specific muscle. Does that make sense? Any questions with that? Okay.
Very good. Thank you.
Yeah, and like same with this windmill kind of thing where they're like touch your feet. I more prefer if you're in a seat that has arms, taking that arm and then just rotating and using that armrest to help you get around. I find anything that has long lever with my shoulders are not friendly. My body does not like those. And unfortunately, because I've stopped working, I don't have access to my exercise programs. I would have created a much more specific exercise program for everybody. If this is something that you would really like, I'll just call my old boss and ask to use his ID to get in, and I can create an actual sitting program for you guys. If you like, just let me know.
That would be great. We
Okay.
can develop that. Thank you.
Then I will do my best to try and create one of those for you guys. Okay. And okay, so that's where that cardio was. 3 days per week at moderate intensity is kind of what they would like for a minimum. Okay. Flexibility is another standpoint, especially for us. Now, flexibility does not just mean stretching. There's also active range of motion, and I'm not sure if you know the difference between them, but like stretching is actually trying to create a stretch and increase the distance that a muscle can move, whereas range of motion is often more about the joint capsule, because you have two things that can affect a joint. You've got muscle length, but then you also have the joint capsule. So if a good example of this is when someone's in a cast and you get out of the cast and there's like virtually no movement. More of that decreased range of motion comes from the capsule of the joint rather than muscles, tendons, that kind of thing, because it just tightens up without that movement. So your active range of motions are any of those things that you've seen, like pulleys, when people are doing pulleys up and down for their shoulder, or doing kind of pendulum exercises where you're just kind of swinging out. The laying on your side and just, bringing your knee over and getting a bit of that rotation. What we just did sitting and going this way, that is a range of motion exercise. There's active range of motion where like I'm just bringing my arm up and coming down. And then there's a passive range where I'm using like the pulleys to pull my arm up. Okay. If you have a lot of pain, your passive range of motion is going to be less painful than active range because you're not having to fight gravity. You've got something else helping you to come across that gravity. Again, like anything, perform these when your inflammation and pain is at its lowest. Active range of motion's general rule of thumb is to perform 5 to 10 repetitions of them every day. When you're doing any of these, whether it be range of motion or stretching, you need to feel like there's a bit of a stretch, but there shouldn't be pain. It should be uncomfortable because you need to be putting enough intensity into it that you're creating change, but not so much that you're creating more inflammation. That's a fine balance. What I would usually say is discomfort versus pain. Discomfort is okay, pain is not. And if there's ever anything that's sharp or that takes your breath away, way too much. Absolutely pull back on it. Again, that 2-hour rule, if 2 hours after performing the stretches, you are feeling very poorly, you have to come back off that intensity of the stretch. Don't hold it as long or don't go so deep into the range of motion. Back off a little bit. Okay. We talked a little bit about Pilates, yoga, and Tai Chi. What is great with some of these exercises is that not only are they getting active range of motion, but they're also getting in flexibility. You're getting in a little bit of strength because you're doing that body weight exercise, and you're also throwing balance into the mix, which is the next thing we're going to talk about. As well, when you are in an acute flare or in acute pain, don't hold stretches. Think more about doing active range of motion at that time. Keep the joints going, keep the joints lubricated, get that fluid moving, but don't stay in a static position for too long because you'll get stuck there. Okay, so balance and body awareness. So I don't know if anyone's heard the term proprioception, but that's what joint position sense is. So if you've ever seen like elite athletes that are standing on those body balls and they're just standing there and they're performing other tasks while they're balancing on these balls, that is joint position sense and balance. Okay, that is way too much of a falls risk for us. Don't do that. But there are exercises, and how you want to start with the standing still exercises, then move up to the moving, and then dual task. So dual task is like it says here, you stand on one leg and you just kind of toss a tennis ball against the wall, so that you're actually now challenging not only your proprioception, but you're also challenging other things because you've got distraction added into it. In general, we get balance from a number of things. Our balance comes from vision. So seeing where the horizon is and knowing, okay, I'm off balance, this is right. The second comes from our vestibular system. That's the inner ear. And that's where kind of being on an unstable surface can challenge that balance. And then the other one is through sensation. So it's actually like feeling the ground with your foot. So examples of progression, there's here, right? We've got, say you've had an ankle sprain, or you've got those weak ankles that I hear a lot about when I was working. You want to start off by just, you can even just stand on 2 feet, depending on your age. You can go to 1 foot. You can go to what we would call tandem. So there's like your feet apart, and then tandem is like 1 foot in front of the other, decreasing the width of your base of support coming in. Then it would be 1 foot. Then it would be taking away another one of those things. So that would be closing your eyes. Close your eyes, take away one of those inputs to then challenge that balance even more. Then the next step would be to go to an unstable surface. So an unstable surface would include like these types of mats where they're super squishy mat. So when you're on it, the feedback is not always the same. You're getting varying feedback. Now, not everybody can have one of those. So sometimes we recommend using like a couch cushion. A lot of places will recommend a pillow. I don't like the pillow because they can slip. Does that make sense? Like where it's not that it's just like a foamy balance change. It actually, the like cotton batten inside can slip, and I don't want anybody to fall. So I would, another, even just a simple way would be to start doing balance exercises in your shoes, because you've got that, you know, a more firm base, and then take your shoe off and just be on like carpet. That would also create that. So body awareness, again, that's where like your Tai Chi, your yoga, your Pilates can help you know where your body is in space. And the big thing with balance and body awareness is it's tapping into a different type of a strength system. So not only is it, yes, a falls prevention thing, but it's also, to go back to the ankle example, we've all done this where you're walking and you step like on a stone and you have that roll over. There's 2 ways that this can go, right? You can roll right over and completely fall, or you can have that roll where you go whoop and you catch yourself. This is training that ability to catch yourself. And that is not the easiest thing to train. When you get beyond this, you can then kind of do like hops, jumps. You can do different change in doing almost like that quick agility drill, but different than like a professional soccer player agility drill. But, you know, kind of tapping your foot out to different places is more along our lines of agility to begin with. And then over and above all of this, another encompassing thing for us is bone health. And I did quite a bit of looking into this. Our bone health is affected by our meds, but again, as I had kind of mentioned, our chemistry is different, and it can affect our bone health that way too. So bone responds to input. That's how it gets stronger. It has to have that input. Now, for those people who are not high risk or who have other comorbidities, that's where they get into that, like that high impact, skipping, jumping, you know, these types of things to really get that impact on the bones to produce that increased growth. That just doesn't typically sit well for the majority of RA patients, because even though we might be strong, that input can affect the joint negatively. Doesn't mean you can't do it, but don't start with that. Don't start there. See if you can work your way up using some of the other principles that we've talked about. So the difference though with bone health is that some things like swimming and using the elliptical, it's not enough pressure. It is amazing for our joints because it unloads our joints, but that unloading also takes away from that impact to the bones to stimulate those osteoblasts to make more bone. So, sorry, not the elliptical, biking, not the elliptical, riding a bike, because the elliptical, you're still pressing down a little bit more. So low impact aerobics, using the step machine, and faster walking. Just that gentle meander is not quite enough. You have to have that heel strike of a more quick pace to create that ground reaction force for our bones to react to it. All of the exercise stuff that I was talking about is for people who don't have the osteoporosis. If you actually have diagnosed osteoporosis, you want to avoid twisting of the spine. So your golf, your tennis, like any of these things that go like this. I have clinically seen a number of spinal compression fractures from just doing these types of activities in people with osteoporosis. Okay. The other thing is you want to avoid extreme forwards. So toe touches and sit-ups. There's those dreaded sit-ups. Like Eileen said, there's so many different things that we can do instead of a sit-up. Now, what do we do when we're sore? We're so tempted to just lay in bed and do nothing. I tend to feel sorry for myself when I'm having an exceptionally high pain day, and I just don't want to do anything except for lay in bed and watch Ted Lasso. So, some of the tips that we can do to avoid those things. We can ice before and after exercise. You can even have a nice warm shower. That gets into that whole same idea of movement, that thixotrophy that we were talking about to reduce stiffness. And here's that 2-hour pain rule that we talked about. Muscle and joint pain that lasts for more than 2 hours after your exercise signals a need to lower the intensity or modify what you're doing. And also remember that medications can mask pain. So yes, they're very helpful. Sometimes I have had to take pain meds to get through a workout, but remember that if you have taken pain meds for your workout, you need to be very aware of how far you're pushing, because you might push into that too much intensity because your pain is masked at that time. This was directly taken from the Arthritis Patient Alliance, from an exercise PowerPoint that I found from them. So I have to give them all the credit for this. This was not me, but here's some a guide, and I'm going to put this in a handout for everybody here too. So you want to make sure that you got your doctor's okay for to start exercising. Consult your physio because we're so great. Slow and steady, regular exercise. And again, having those ideas, that planning, when are you going to do it? When do you feel the best? Respecting that 2-hour pain rule. Yeah, knowing in the beginning, here's the other thing with this statement too, is there's what we call DOMS pain, and then what I like to coin as the pathological pain. So DOMSy pain, delayed onset muscle soreness. That's that typical, when your friends say, oh, I did a leg workout, it's really hard to get off the toilet. That's your DOMSy. That's the muscles changing. It's the chemistry that is in the muscle that it's that lactic acid. I don't know if anybody watches hockey, but you can see all the guys doing interviews on the bikes after the game. That is to keep their heart going, keep the muscles, to keep the circulatory system, to flush out that lactic acid. When the lactic acid just sits in the muscle, you get even more of that DOMSy pain. So flushing it out, lots of water. Yep.
That's interesting. I live beside a hospital, so I don't know if you can hear the sirens. That's interesting you mentioned that though, because like when I exercise, I love going into the sauna directly after. Mm-hmm. And I find I don't deal with a lot of muscle soreness when I do that.
Yeah, so keeping things moving and going, and that flushing out of that lactic acid really decreases that post-exercise soreness.
Would you say the sauna would do that? Like the heat of it or anything?
It can because you're sweating, right? And moving things out. As the other thing though that it does is it keeps those muscles warm, and you don't get that rebound stiffness as well.
Okay, because people in the sauna are always talking about how great the sauna is for you, but they never can explain why. So now I'm going to.
Yeah, I find that, but then like for myself, I'm the flip side. When I get too hot, I swell like there's no tomorrow. So I'm not a fan of the saunas.
Yeah, you have
I'm,
to be very.
Yeah, I'm the other way around. But I think that's also because I tend to, as my rheumatologist would say, I have connective tissue lupus-y symptoms as well over and above my RA. And I think that, again, as vague as it does sound and as almost like a scapegoat as a professional, you really need to know what works for you and what doesn't. And that's going to take trial and error. And so that kind of falls into this, you know, you've been warned that you may feel increased pain and stiffness at first. It's also that trial and error of figuring out what your baseline is, how far you can push yourself, and also knowing what you like, what excites you about movement, right? That might not be going to the gym, but it might be that Tai Chi class. It might not be going for a walk, but it is going for a bike ride, you know? So finding the things that elicit joy in you also increase adherence and increase enjoyment in general.
That's so true.
My daughter says, find the movements that move you.
That's really smart. And I think that's why I love my Zumba. I don't do it as the same intensity that I used to, but the music and like the group exercise and the connection with others, that's what moves me and excites me.
Yeah, and also too, so not all of us are in a position where we can go to a physio and get a program done and things like that. There are programs like OsteoFit that you can look, or Arthrosize is another term that different community centers have, where people have been, they're kind of like, they're either provincial or national programs where people have, obviously they're not going to have quite the same knowledge as a professional will, but they'll have more knowledge than the average fitness instructor on how to protect our joints, challenge our joints, support us, and that kind of a thing. That's another reason why I really like the Aquasize. Not only do you have that compression, but the water creates resistance, which also creates that strengthening, right? And then here's those sitting exercises that we talked about. And now here's that RA and muscle pain. So, Eileen, there was literally not a lot out there on that whole idea of muscle ache. When I looked into it, even when I went into the publication databases, it would come up as symptoms of RA, muscle ache. And that was the extent, like it would pop up, but only because it was mentioned under the list of symptoms. It did not really get into why. Now, one of the things though that some of us can have is enthesitis. And enthesitis is inflammation of the enthesis. The enthesis is where the tendon attaches to the bone. So most of the time when you have tendinopathy or tendonitis, it's where the tendon and the muscle are attaching to each other, not at the site of the bone. And it's interesting because if you look up enthesitis, they typically say it's more with like ankylosing spondylitis and psoriatic arthritis. Those are the two that typically only say you get enthesopathy with. However, I did find a very interesting article that said, no, it can be just as apparent in RA. And the enthesitis is what my elbows have. That is.
I just read that too, actually.
Oh, okay.
I was reading about psoriatic arthritis, and it said that this is more common in AS and psoriatic arthritis, but can happen in RA as well. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, the one article that I found, they actually found that the incidence was the same between the two. And then the other thing though was muscle impairment. I found a good article that was talking about muscle impairment, and they were comparing it to age appropriate comparisons as well as affected with RA and not affected with RA. And they found that a lot of our muscle impairments isn't because of age, it's because of the RA. And so I found this conceptual model in that article. So we have the chronic inflammation and we get these ectopic fat depositions. So that means that we tend to have fattier muscles than people who don't have RA. And that muscle fatness decreases strength, it decreases extensibility of the muscle as well. And then one of the big things that they talked about was muscle atrophy. That is huge within the RA population. And I found that interesting because I have not noticed that in myself as of yet, yes, Christina.
No, I was just wondering, since, do you think that older patients with similar inflammatory arthritis or rheumatic conditions could experience this? Like speaking of lupus, or is it just specific to RA?
This article was specific to RA, but no, they talked a lot about, in general, they would call it like the inflammatory arthropathies, right? Like that umbrella term. This particular article that I've referenced here, it was just looking at RA. But when you think about it, if you look at that cycle, right, there's the TNF, the interleukin, those types of things, that happens in lupus, that happens in spondylitis, because all of our meds all work together, right? Like I know people on Humira that have ankylosing spondylitis, who have Crohn's, who have, right? So it's attacking the exact same inflammatory cascade. So logic to me dictates that it would translate over to the other inflammatory diseases as well, because it's the presence of the TNF that creates this. So
question.
Mm-hmm.
The fatty muscle thing, I have heard that it's harder for people with RA to lose weight. Mm-hmm. Is that because of the fatty muscle thing?
I don't believe so, because it's a different, now I should say I am not an expert in that, in like the specifics of this, but using the knowledge that I do have, I think that that's different, because that's a slightly different system, right? That's looking at metabolism, that's looking at more cardiovascular than just specific muscle. I think this is looking more at muscle composition than body composition.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
A little bit, yeah.
Yeah.
I won't think it could be a contributing factor, not like the only factor that is not allowing you to lose weight, right? Because then when we're also dealing with chronic inflammation, which you could experience insulin resistance as well. So I think it has to be really a whole model, just to kind of look at individually what is affecting you. Personally, I have not been like in the road of gaining weight like dramatically, and I've been on prednisone for 20 years. So I think that's what it said. It has to be very specific. I know, right? But I think that's where like individuality. But I do feel from the metabolic perspective, because when we have more fat stores, then it's more active, and again, it kind of produces more inflammation. So it could be a contributing factor, I'll say. We'll have to look more into it.
Yeah, I can definitely go into that article and look at their references and see, and Christine and we can dissect that for you and get some information on that for you.
We should write an article on it, all three of us.
Sure. But so that's kind of the problem that I find with doing things like this, is that I keep identifying holes in research, and then I'm like, oh, I should research that. and then I'm like, no. But what I need to do is I need to create some kind of a network where I find the holes and then I find people to do the research, because research is not really my bag. I did some muscle phys research when I was in university, and it was not enjoyable. Just like exercising, you have to find the things that you really enjoy to put your time into. That's not one of them, but so I can't answer your question, is essentially what it comes down to, Eileen. I don't exactly know what fundamentally causes that muscle pain with us.
Oh, you know what I think might be causing mine? Could also be fibromyalgia.
Yeah, 100%.
Because like I'm still like very confused if I have it or not. I've been told I do, I've been told I don't, I've been told it's in remission. But recently my chiropractor and my acupuncturist keep telling me that my back is in great shape, but I have severe back pain and it's all at like tender points. So I'm thinking it's fibromyalgia.
Yeah, that and also from a personal perspective, this is not professional at all. I tend to get a lot of fevers with my RA, and when I have a fever, again, I think that this also falls under that whole lupusy umbrella as well for myself. I just ache all over, just like you would with any fever, right? I find I ache when I get overtired. And so what those mechanisms are as well, I don't know exactly, but I have definitely noticed a correlation personally with those two things.
And also
And
hormones.
Yeah,
definitely hormones too.
Yeah. And then here's all, I have more references as well, but these are just some of the references, points, different articles and things that I found when I was looking into this for you guys. So I know that a lot of people wanted very specific things,